Welcome to r/pro revenge, where OP destroys the car of a gas thief. Our next Reddit post is from March Competitive. I had a neighbor that would walk into my backyard, take my gas can of gas from my mower and put it into his car and mower, and then return the can. I found this out because I'd gotten a little suspicious that my 5-gallon can was always nearly empty every time I went to mow the lawn, and the lawnmower only had like a 1-quart tank. This was back before cheap, easy security cameras, so I had to set up a webcam from my laptop with motion detection software. I caught the guy going into my backyard literally 5 minutes after I left the house. For the next week, every time I had to take a piss, I pissed in the gas can. Now it was full of piss, but still, it smells enough like gas to fool an idiot. Then I left it on the back patio again. I made a big show of checking the fluids in my car and packing a few bags. I made sure the neighbor knew that I was getting ready to go on a trip and I'd be gone for a while. I was hoping he takes the bait. I come back home in about an hour. The thief is in his front yard pulling the rope on his lawnmower so hard. It looks like he's gonna have a stroke. He's turning bright red and cursing. Later, he gets in his car, makes it a couple of blocks up the road, and it suddenly breaks down. I check the gas can on my patio. It's empty. Also, I want to add that this guy was a huge piece of garbage, and that's not the only thing he did. I found out that he had arrest warrants. So, I ended up getting him arrested by applying for a sheriff's ride-along program in his name. Our next Reddit post is from Amenadiel. My wife's a nurse. Back then, in early 2000, she worked in an ICU of a relatively exclusive and therefore expensive hospital. Specifically, she had to care for patients who had undergone cardiac surgery. At the same time, I was working for a small company that was going out of business. The owners were retiring, we hadn't secured any important contracts lately, and in my country, you have to pay for employee severance, unless you file for bankruptcy. So they decided to shut down while they still had enough cash to pay our severances. One day my wife calls me and tells me about this gentleman in his late 50s that had been on the verge of passing away. And after that close call, he was so grateful and stuff. We'll call him Benny Lowy. The gentleman happened to work in electronic imports, which gave him access to incredibly convenient deals. Long story short, he was so grateful that he could sell us an LCTV, a store demo unit that had been used just once, and we'd only need to pay like 1/4 of its retail price. As long as we kept it quiet, because he was risking his relationship with the brand. It caught me off guard. I said yes, and my wife paid. Anyway, the only TV we had in the house had been a wedding present and weighed over 100 pounds. We were eager to replace it. I was naive, I know. But I thought that my wife knew all the personal data from this guy since he was her patient, so it seemed unlikely that he would target her for a scam. The guy's father was a known businessman. Now retired and approaching his 80s, Mr. Lowy Sr. was well respected in his community and wouldn't have let his son wreak havoc. Also, my wife had acquaintances in common with Benny's brother, a known doctor of another hospital. Christmas was approaching, so she asked Benny, who had already been discharged and back home, for advice regarding the present that she wanted to give me. He advised a phone. He hooked her up with the best that she could think of. Now, I can't remember the exact model, but it was the Sony Ericsson flagship, and it wasn't yet offered by local carriers. He had access to it because of his status as local representative for that brand. She went with it and paid. Since my employer was shutting down, for the sake of it, my wife asked Benny if he knew of someone needing an IT guy. Of course, he said. I'll meet your husband at this place tomorrow. And there I was, in a gas station uptown, and he pulled over in a luxury car. Mr. Lowy was a normal-looking guy. He used a cane and had noticeable knee or hip pain. We sat down in the gas station coffee shop, and he told me about a middle management position reporting to him in a mining company that I'd barely heard about. He coached me on what I should say in the upcoming job interview. We spoke about salary. I was dazzled. Wait, mining? Didn't he say that he was into electronic imports? He was the type of guy that you can't stop to question because he'd already thrown something extra into the mix, and this position had a better paycheck than the one that I was being laid off from. In the next days, we had a few phone calls. Things looked promising. I had already been laid off. We agreed that he would pick me up on December 24th and introduce me to senior managers as the recommended help desk junior manager. I woke up extra early, put on my best suit, walked in the front yard. Hours went by. After calling him repeatedly, he told me he'd been assaulted and robbed. "They took my cane and broke it on my knee," he wailed. Poor guy. I told him to forget about my interview for the time being. No, I promised you. I'll make it up to you." Of course, since he had been injured, he wasn't able to deliver the items my wife bought from him. That night, my mother asked me about the new job. I couldn't bring myself to tell her about the delay. I told her it was going fine. That night, I Googled him. Nothing showed up except for some awards in the Imports and Customs Association of whatever. He called me to reschedule our interview for December 31st. Again, picture me in my best suit outside my house on a summer morning. Of course, he didn't show up. When I finally reach him, he tells me that when his car had been stolen last week, they took his wallet too, which these thugs eventually dropped during another robbery. So now he had been detained as a suspect for that. That night, we went to my parents for New Year's Eve, and my mother asked me about the new job. "It's all fine," I said. I Googled him again, this time with variations regarding his name or the supposed company he was setting me up with. Not much showed up, nothing shady. The next call was a week later. He told me that because he was being involved in a police investigation, this mining company had fired him. But this was actually good, because now I was going to be interviewed to take his position, IT manager. This meant double my former paycheck and securing a position that would be a leap forward in my career. So I didn't ask many questions. I was just grateful. All those delays in the end would pay off. This situation, as you've already figured out, went on for weeks. The interview never happened. The electronics never arrived. We lost our money, our time, our Christmas, our hopes. And I was still unemployed and hadn't been applying for job offers since I had this one allegedly secured. Somewhere during this, I texted him, "Why are you doing this to us?" He texted back, "If I wanted to, you have nothing on me. But if you stick with me, you'll be rewarded tenfold." Time went by. Eventually, my wife overhears from a coworker about this patient in another hospital that she was working at. She had fallen for this too, but her husband was a detective. So a few hours later, we were filling him in on the details of the scam that we fell for. Asking around, he found a third nurse scammed by this guy. Soon enough, he was detained, this time for real, and admitted he had been scamming people due to an invented mild dementia. This detective talks him into an off-court deal in which he gave us back every cent, but not my time or my hopes, in exchange for us not pursuing any legal action. This was a decent deal because us, having failed to make a written agreement of any of these purchases, had at most a weak claim to our money back. By the way, the money this guy paid back to us, he had to borrow from his father and some from his brother, a doctor. After this, I was thinking, what could prevent other people from falling into this scammer's lies? Well, perhaps some Google results. I was in the unique position to tell my story without risking legal backlash, so I created a blog on WordPress.com, something like BennyLoeyTheScammer.com. It was just a single post telling my story. I ended it with, "Has this happened to you?" In the following day, that post's comments had a dozen stories much like mine. With the permission of each poster, I turned each post into its own story. Each one of those eventually had comments, and so on. For the past 15 years, to this day, if you Google Benny Loey, that blog will be the first result. He tried to sue me over it, and the case, of course, was dropped. But he took it to appeals and then to the Supreme Court. For clarity, this story is not taking place in the United States. He filed another case under a different local court, which was probably dismissed, and they ruled that Benny Loey also had to pay for the sued party's attorney fees. Sometimes I feel sorry for him, but every time I consider taking the blog down, I log in again, which I did today after 4 years, and see that he's still doing it. Even though I know that I'm legally covered, the fact that he's never contacted me tells me that he's done this to so many people, he wouldn't even know where to start. Down in the comments, someone asks OP why this guy kept stringing OP along if there wasn't any money in it, and OP said that after the initial scam, he thinks the guy just really liked lying and feeling like he was outsmarting or manipulating people, so he just did it for fun, basically. Our next Reddit post is from Deleted. Last year, I took a summer job for a kids camp. It seemed to be quite well paid, and I wanted to try how working with kids goes. The hiring process was a little odd. As for the interview, I was called unexpectedly, and that woman, which was later my boss, spoke on the phone for 2.5 hours and asked some really weird personal questions. For example, she asked, "You aren't a COVIDiot, aren't you?" Anyway, I needed the money, and it was the only callback I'd gotten so far, so I took it. She then made us all come in 2 times before starting the job so that she can explain it to us. Both times, it took the whole effing day, without being paid because it wasn't mandatory. I got to be the boss of my team. Then the first day came around, and we faced 20 children with their parents. But it was super disorganized. We basically improvised and wrote the kids' names down as they came, and we hoped that these were indeed the kids who signed up. Later, the games for the kids arrived, but the contents were measly at best. She had given us 2 kinds of games, Uno and something else, with like 3 copies of each. We got little instruments for the kids to decorate, but when she came back around to check on us a few days later, she screamed at us, "Those effing kids shouldn't have been allowed to take the instruments home," which she never said to us and made no sense. The next few days went on like this. She came around and screamed at us for doing something that made sense to everyone else and pretended that she had instructed us otherwise during the unpaid, non-mandatory orientation meeting. To be clear, during those meetings, she just talked about her personal life and didn't give any instructions. Then she offended every single person in existence. She didn't want to have lactose intolerant or handicapped kids in the camp because they'd be too much of a hassle. My Muslim colleague got scolded for wanting to go home to her toddler after a 10-hour shift. And my boss asked her in front of everyone if her son still sucks on her titties. Because if she didn't, she doesn't have a reason to go home. Parents with questions or complaints are to be educated like kids because they behave like that, when they didn't get screwed by their wife the night before. Also, she made us work more than 12 hours without a break, and she still criticized me when I stood up and went home at 12 hours of work. We have a law that requires that here. But 2 events stood out when she went after the kids. On the first occasion, you have to remember that this woman has an unhealthy obsession with COVID. She not only changed the rules of everything anytime to fit her narrative with us, she also did that with the parents, which led to misunderstandings. Every single day. She asked the kids, between the ages of 4 to 10, which one had done the antigen test and which had done the PCR test. Of course, the children didn't know what that was, and a little 5-year-old girl raised her hand for the false one. When my boss noticed that, she gave this poor girl the scolding of her life and told her that she's dumb as a rock for not knowing the difference. I'm pretty sure my boss spit in the girl's face. I was so in shock. I probably should have slapped her for that, but I didn't. The girl tried hard not to cry and didn't come back the days after. The second incident was even more disturbing. A 4-year-old boy hit his head at the playground when they were all outside. I was back in the office when my colleagues came running. I called the boss while my colleague called the ambulance. When I told my boss this and that my colleague was already on the phone with the ambulance, she scolded me. Not because the boy got hurt. No. Because we called the ambulance. In her words, it wasn't that bad that the father should find out. As if he was blind and wouldn't see an open head wound. The ambulance came and told us it was completely fine, even mandatory to call them in this case, and the boy suffered no further injury. He's fine now, thankfully. But I was furious. I was completely freaking out of anger. I'd only worked there for 9 days, and the kids, as well as the staff, had been abused. Instead of following my impulse to tell her off, I calmed myself, and the next day I didn't go to work, but instead to the doctor. I explained to my doctor that my boss abuses me, but I can't terminate the contract early. So to keep me from snapping, my doctor put me on sick leave without an end date. My boss was not amused when I sent her that doctor's notice, but I ignored her calls. I then proceeded to talk with my teammates and encouraged them to get sick leave and told them exactly what they can say and do to get that. My boss even tried to get rid of my Muslim coworker illegally. I explained to my coworker that the paperwork was not legal and she should ignore it and still go on sick leave. So in 2 weeks, my boss had to replace all 6 camp workers, including me. And I took all the records home too, so she couldn't just pass them on. I also changed the password to the email account and did everything to piss my boss off. The story doesn't end there. As I later found out, word spread like wildfire because she was such a piece of trash. 1 month after camp started, at the other campsite locations, half of the staff went on paid sick leave. Apparently, she called some of them and begged them to come back and offered bonuses as high as double the pay. And still, nobody came back to help. The silver lining was that the parents also had enough, and many kids were taken out of that camp. So at the end of July, I was on paid vacation, paid sick leave, and she calls. She told me, in a surprisingly calm voice, that if I don't want to come back next month, I should tell her now, please. And she offered to end my contract without further obligations, and to pay me for the whole month of July. I tell her how I'm coming back because I really want to get better and other BS. Of course, I just didn't come back, and instead collected 1 additional full month of sick leave without even ever speaking to her directly again. I also went out of my way to continue offering this information to every single staff member at all locations that wanted to leave and still get paid, and who wanted to know where they can report her. So in the end, this is what she got for being a disrespectful B-word. She lost half of her workers. Everyone hates her and wants nothing to do with her. She has to pay me for 2 full months, as well as pay out my vacation time, my overtime, and the mandatory bonus you get for doing extra hours. All of this multiplied by 6 at least. I got around 6,000 euros for 9 days of work from them. Her entire enterprise went downhill. Of course, I also had to get my money through legal support, so that came down on her too. I am totally safe after all this. She won't be able to retaliate after what I did here. She tried to harass me, so I blocked her. I heard she read out my personal information to my other colleagues who stayed behind, and she called me all kinds of names. So if she ever tries to sue me or blackmail me, I have evidence and witnesses for her trying to dox me, insulting me, and various other things. That was r/pro revenge, and if you like this content, check out my podcast where I publish the exact same episodes. Also, hit that subscribe button because I put out new Reddit videos every single day.